Let us remember what a social norm is made of. There are empirical expectations, that is, we expect people in our reference network to follow a particular rule of behavior. There are normative expectations, that is, we expect people in our reference network to believe that we should follow that particular rule of behavior, and we have a conditional preference for following that rule given these social expectations. We know that empirical expectations must change first in the process of norm abandonment, since norm violators risk being punished for disobeying the norm. We also know that factual and normative belief change alone may not lead to behavioral change. As our beliefs change, we still need to be reasonably sure that we will not find ourselves in a minority by behaving differently. This is typical of collective action problems, where we have reasons to think that a new practice would be better for all, but most individuals hesitate to change for fear of incurring a cost. Let us listen to an example of how difficult it may be to change behavior related to the practice of female genital cutting.
No, even if people know or understand that not cutting a girl will still keep her pure, will still keep her clean, will still maintain her whole, people worry that they would stop cutting their daughters and others will continue cutting, and then they would get their daughters married off and they would not have their children married. Okay, so it's this thing about committing to the change, that parents want the best for their children. They want the daughters to get good marriages. So a family decides not to cut a girl, she's kept intact, and then she doesn't get a man, and then the family that cuts the daughter gets a husband. That's one of the worries, that the girl will not be married.
When actions are interdependent, successful change will require not only a change in factual and normative personal beliefs, but also some way to coordinate collective change. Coordination is a complex process, but it cannot occur without first movers who are willing to take the risk of initiating change. What kind of first mover or potential trendsetter would be willing to incur a cost, and how can they be identified? Let me give you an example of sit-ins as a tool of norm abandonment, the vital role played by first movers in spearheading social change, and the characteristics that enable them to take action. In the early 60s, at the onset of the civil rights movement, Black Americans had ample reasons to protest systemic inequality in the United States. Again, reasons for change are a prerequisite for the collective change of social norms. But many likely felt uneasy about protesting without others to back them up. Andrews and Biggs analyzed the forces that contributed to the rise of sit-ins, a vehicle for protest, and highlight the type of trendsetter who marshaled the movement into full force. The more autonomous and affluent Black adults and Black college students there were in a city, the more likely the city was to experience sit-ins. Autonomous Black adult populations had a greater capacity to dissent, and Black college students likely perceived dissent to be less risky. Black students probably held these perceptions since fewer social sanctions could be applied to them. They could not be fired from a job for staging a sit-in the same way that a working Black adult could be. The very nature of autonomy suggests that autonomous individuals in both populations were more prone than others to deviate from maladaptive norms. Here we must also notice another important element that characterizes trendsetters, in addition to having good reasons for change and being autonomous: risk perception. To act against a norm, one must have a reasonably low perception of the risks one will encounter. I will discuss both autonomy and risk perception later on. Even if trendsetters deviate from an established norm, they will never influence their peer if news of their deviance do not spread. Thus, it is not surprising that in Andrews and Biggs' analysis, news coverage was a particularly significant predictor of subsequent nearby sit-in. Such coverage reliably signaled that dissent was both possible and already occurring. Communication within social networks had a similar yet diminished effect. As these networks could not facilitate the spread of information to as many people or as many locations as the radio or newspapers could. The failure of previous movements to spark social change shows that even if there are trendsetters presently acting against an established norm, their deviance will not necessarily influence their peers. Their behavior, if well publicized, merely increases the likelihood that others will follow. We will later analyze other important elements of norm change, such as the possibility of disseminating information and coordinating actions, both crucial to successful change. But first, let us examine in greater detail what makes a person a first mover.